It was a hot summer night in Paris. The clock struck exactly 8:00 p.m. when the intro of the renowned program Le Grand Entretien from the French channel TF1 took over televisions across the country. At the desk, as elegant as ever, sat Anne-Sophie Lapix, an icon of French journalism, known for her sharp thinking, incisive questions, and impeccable, almost impenetrable posture. Beside her, wearing the same shy smile and gentle gaze as always, was N'Golo Kanté. He wore a well-tailored navy blue suit, a white shirt without a tie, and fiddled with his hands on his lap, slightly nervous. It was rare to see him in interviews, especially one with such a large audience. But he had accepted the invitation, with one condition: no pre-agreed questions. He wanted to answer only from the heart, in his own way. Anne-Sophie, surprised by the demand, agreed. She knew she had a different kind of guest in front of her, someone who had never generated a single scandalous headline, a World Cup champion who still took the métro, a multimillionaire who lived like a working man. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs, she began with perfect diction. Ce soir, nous avons l'honneur de recevoir un homme discret mais immense. Sur le terrain, il court pour 10. Dans la vie, il avance en silence. She paused dramatically. N'Golo Kanté, merci d'être avec nous ce soir. Kanté smiled, nodded slightly, and replied softly, Merci à vous. The initial questions were like a light warm-up. His childhood in the suburbs of Paris, the hard work, the beginning in football, Leicester, Chelsea, the World Cup. He answered politely, but without seeking the spotlight. His eyes avoided looking directly at the camera. It was as if, with every word, he was trying not to overshadow anyone. But Anne-Sophie wasn't satisfied. She felt there was something there. A depth behind the simplicity. And perhaps for the first time, she didn't just want to inform, she wanted to understand. N'Golo, vous êtes admiré pour votre humilité. On dit que vous êtes l'homme le plus gentil du football. Est-ce que cette gentillesse vous a coûté quelque chose? You are admired for your humility. They say you're the nicest man in football. Has that kindness ever cost you something? Kanté lowered his eyes for a few seconds. He took a deep breath. For the first time, his smile faltered. Oui. Yes. The studio fell silent. So did Anne-Sophie. The answer dropped like a stone into a calm lake. She had perhaps expected a light anecdote, but there was something deeper in that tone. Something that took the question out of the surface. Pouvez-vous nous en dire plus? Can you tell us more? He took his time, adjusted his collar, looked up at the ceiling as if seeking permission from the universe to speak. When his gaze returned to her, his eyes were moist. J'ai perdu quelqu'un à cause de ça. I lost someone because of that. Anne-Sophie leaned forward slightly. The audience at home might have thought of a romantic relationship, but there was something deeper in that tone, something that pulled the question further down. C'était quelqu'un de votre famille? Was it someone from your family? Kanté didn't respond right away. His eyes began to well with tears, and for the first time in her career, Anne-Sophie couldn't hide the impact. Her shoulders contracted slightly. She was facing something no amount of preparation could anticipate. C'était mon frère. It was my brother. Silence. Not even the soft background music of the show could be heard. Kanté looked at the ground. Anne-Sophie, paralyzed. The camera operators didn't know whether to zoom in or hold back. Il avait des problèmes. Des gens profitaient de lui. Et moi, j'étais ailleurs. Je pensais qu'en restant gentil, en aidant tout le monde, tout irait bien. Mais je l'ai laissé seul. Et un jour, il n'était plus là. He had problems. People were taking advantage of him. And I was elsewhere. I thought that by staying kind, helping everyone, everything would be fine. But I left him alone. And one day, he was gone. That's when Anne-Sophie began to cry. It wasn't a loud cry. It was contained, deep, like someone recognizing themselves in another's pain. Her tears fell slowly, tracing perfect lines down her usually unshakable face. She tried to go on, swallowed hard, blinked several times, But Kanté, seeing that, extended his hand. A simple gesture, natural, without shame. She, without hesitation, took it. The public was confused. Some commented on Twitter, "What's going on? Why is she crying?" I've never seen this on French TV. But nothing was said clearly, only glances, only presence. There, in the living rooms of millions of homes, a silence crept in, and no one really knew why. The interview wasn't over, but the atmosphere in the studio had completely changed. After Kanté's revelation about his brother, time seemed suspended. The cameras were still rolling, the microphones still picking up every breath, but there was an absence of words that said more than any question could. Anne-Sophie Lapix, after a deep breath and discreetly wiping her tears with a white tissue, tried to regain control of the show. But something in her had changed. Her voice, once firm, now carried an unintentional softness. She was no longer the journalist looking for a headline. She was a woman, in front of another soul laid bare. Merci de partager cela avec nous, Ngolo. Vraiment. Thank you for sharing that with us, Ngolo. Truly. He only nodded, his eyes still misty, but now fixed on her. There was something in Kanté's gaze that blended pain and acceptance, as if he was used to swallowing tears, used to moving forward, but that for some reason, on that night, he had chosen to stop and look back. Anne-Sophie shifted the tone of the interview. She dropped the agenda, made a subtle gesture to the production team, signaling that she would follow her own path. The host, who rarely strayed from the script, chose to follow her instinct. Vous avez parlé de votre frère, mais on sait si peu de votre vie personnelle. Est-ce que cette douleur vous accompagne toujours, ou vous avez trouvé une forme de paix? You spoke about your brother, but we know so little about your personal life. Does that pain still follow you? Or have you found some form of peace? Kanté smiled sadly, looked at the camera for a second, as if looking at someone no longer there, then back at her. Je ne pense pas qu'on guérit vraiment. On apprend à marcher avec la douleur. Elle devient une partie de nous. I don't think we ever really heal. We learn to walk with the pain. It becomes a part of us. The audience at home didn't know what to think. Some had expected a light interview about football, behind the scenes at Chelsea, the differences between Tuchel and Deschamps. Others maybe looked for more than entertainment, but no one was prepared for that. The vulnerability of an idol, raw humanity on primetime television. Anne-Sophie paused for a long moment, absorbing the response. She herself seemed to be wrestling with something inside her. And then, she made a confession that surprised even the sound technicians. Je vais vous dire quelque chose que je n'ai jamais dit en direct. I'm going to tell you something I've never said on air. Kanté raised his eyebrows, surprised. The studio became even quieter. One of the camera operators instantly switched the shot, zooming in on her eyes. J'ai perdu ma mère à 12 ans, d'un cancer. Et pendant des années, j'ai cru que si je devenais forte, professionnelle, irréprochable, je pourrais enterrer ce vide. Mais parfois, ça revient. I lost my mother when I was 12, to cancer. And for years, I believed that if I became strong, professional, irreproachable, I could bury that emptiness. But sometimes, it comes back. Kanté said nothing. He just leaned in slightly as if to say, I understand, without words. The public, for the first time, saw Anne-Sophie Lapix without her armor. C'est pour ça que vos mots m'ont touché, parce qu'on ne s'attend pas à ce que la douleur soit dite à voix basse. Et vous l'avez fait, doucement. Mais c'était un cri. That's why your words touched me. Because we don't expect pain to be spoken softly. And you did it. Gently. But it was a scream. Kanté finally spoke. But what he said wasn't what the public expected. Vous êtes plus forte que vous ne le croyez. Et parfois, il faut pleurer devant des millions pour se rappeler qu'on est humain. You are stronger than you think, and sometimes we need to cry in front of millions to remember that we are human. Tears returned to her eyes. But now, they weren't from pain. They were from relief. As if that studio, so used to masks, had become a place of healing. And then came the question no one expected. From him. Est-ce que vous êtes heureuse, Anne-Sophie? Are you happy, Anne-Sophie? She choked on her breath. The audience at home, on social media, in bars, in living rooms, held theirs. Je ne sais pas. I don't know. Silence. Deep. The kind of silence you don't hear, but feel. And on the screen, two faces. Two human beings. No script. No defenses. Moi non plus. Me neither, said Kanté without shame. It was as if time had stopped. Television, that vehicle of edited images and rehearsed speeches, had become a window into something real. And the real wasn't pretty. It wasn't heroic. It was fragile. Human. The broadcast continued, but something had already changed. Not just in the show, not just between the two, but in the collective perception of what vulnerability is and what courage looks like. The studio by that moment was no longer a stage. It was almost a confessional. Two strangers, in front of millions, had recognized each other in their most intimate pain. Not because of shared experiences, but because of something rarer, the courage to bare oneself before the world without seeking pity, without performing strength. Anne-Sophie stayed silent for a moment after Kanté's last response. That final exchange of words seemed to have emptied everything. The script, the time blocks, the commercial breaks, none of it mattered anymore. It was as if the television had stopped working within the television. She looked at the sheet of questions on the desk and, in a simple but profound gesture, turned the paper upside down, as if to say, I don't need this anymore. Then, she looked back at Kanté with a different smile. It wasn't the host's smile. It was the smile of someone who's thankful for being seen. Je ne sais pas comment finir cette interview maintenant. I don't know how to end this interview now. Kanté gave a small chuckle. Soft, almost childlike, like someone who notices life's irony. Peut-être, on ne doit pas finir. Peut-être on doit juste laisser les gens penser un peu. Maybe we shouldn't end. Maybe we should just let people think for a while. Anne-Sophie nodded, as if finally understanding that this interview wasn't a product, it was a mirror. An uncomfortable, honest, rare mirror. The camera slowly zoomed out. One of the camera operators, breaking every framing rule, let part of the studio show in the shot. It was as if the system itself admitted, sometimes we can't contain what's real. On Twitter, the hashtag #Kanté exploded, but not with jokes, memes, or football declarations. The posts read things like, I didn't know he carried that. I cried with Anne-Sophie. I've never seen her like that. Tonight, I looked inward because of an interview. In some corners of France, people called relatives they hadn't spoken to in years. Others wrote messages they had been afraid to send. Some just turned off the TV without switching the channel. They left the screen dark, trying to process. Back in the studio, Anne-Sophie made a hand gesture to the technicians. She didn't want to end with the usual theme music or standard credits. She wanted silence. She wanted the void to speak. And so it was. The screen slowly faded to black, with the final image being the gentle handshake between the two. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, Anne-Sophie didn't appear on the 20-hour news. The network issued a short statement. The host requested a day of rest after last night's interview. On social media, she posted a single sentence. Merci, N'Golo. Tu as ouvert une porte en moi. Thank you, N'Golo. You opened a door inside me. As for Kanté, he was seen leaving a café in Montmartre alone, in a gray hoodie and cap. A photographer tried to approach him, but he simply smiled, thanked him, and gently asked, Aujourd'hui, je veux juste marcher. Today, I just want to walk. And he walked. No security, no staff, no apparent destination. Days later, a journalist from a small community newspaper revealed that Kanté had, anonymously, funded an NGO offering psychological support to grieving youth. The name of the NGO? Silencieux mais vivant, silent but alive. Anne-Sophie visited the NGO's headquarters weeks later. She spoke with the psychologists, the youths, the volunteers. And in a small room smelling of fresh paint, she saw a phrase written on the wall: Parler doucement peut être un cri. Speaking softly can be a scream. She smiled. The following year, Kanté released a small book. Not a traditional autobiography, but a collection of reflections, letters, and fragments. No flashy cover, no massive promotion. In the preface, he wrote, J'ai longtemps cru que ma valeur était dans ma discrétion. Mais parfois, parler, c'est aussi servir. Alors, j'ai parlé. For a long time, I believed my value was in my discretion. But sometimes speaking is also a form of service, so I spoke. The book became required reading in some French schools, and the interview, it won awards. But more than that, it earned a place in the popular imagination, not for revealing a secret, but for showing that even the quietest carry oceans within. Years later, when asked about that night on the show, Kanté simply replied, Ce n'était pas une interview, c'était une prière. It wasn't an interview, it was a prayer. And maybe it was, not one made on your knees, but eye to eye, in the middle of the night, in front of millions, asking for nothing, simply saying, I feel it too. And in that shared silence, more powerful than any goal, N'Golo Kanté became something even greater than a champion. He became human, and he taught the world that the greatest strength sometimes lives in the words we whisper,